old for video games?
You have failed.
The same way, I will destroy you. And my friend is truly dead.
Now this is pod racing.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Graying Jedi podcast. I am Jedi Master UrzaMaster. Joining me as always, Lord Uther and Jedi Master Psyllium Maas. Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome back. This is our 12th episode of the Graying Jedi, and it promises to be a good one with a celestial event, the Eye of Andor, or rather, Andor, the episode, the Eye. The Eye of Andor would be kind of small, squishy, and gelatinous. The Eye celestial event promises to be much, much more, at least as far as we've heard thus far. I'm just going to say let's jump right to Jedi Master Psyllium Maas, because there's not a ton of background here, and we're going to get into the meat and potatoes pretty quick on this one. So, Psyllium Maas, take it away.
Thank you, Jedi Master UrzaMaster, Jedi Master Lord Uther, and all of you excited Graying Jedi fans. Thank you so much for joining us on these adventures in galaxies far, far away. Your enthusiasm and your engagement are noted, and we appreciate all the support as we get to talk to you about rebellions and empires and everything that falls in between. Yes, we have reached the third and climactic story in the Aldhani arc. This is the final episode to be directed by Susanna White and written by Tony Gilroy's brother Dan. And we wish them well because they've done a bang-up job the previous two episodes, laying the foundation for this climactic event. And what this episode, The Eye, proves is that while we've spent our previous episodes talking about how rich and layered and nuanced characterizations are and the emotional shadings and how it can leave you on the edge of your seat, this episode proves that they can throw down and deliver knockout action sequences with TIE fighters and blasters and all sorts of shenanigans going on there. They can give as good as they get, and in this one, it is a satisfying payoff to what we have been setting up. All great heist stories, whether it's Michael Mann's Heat, Christopher Nolan's opening to The Dark Knight, Danny Ocean and his buddies taking on the casinos in Ocean's 11, all of them, they work in dual ways. It's exciting to see the heist planned out. It's exciting to see all of the steps that will be necessary to pull it off successfully. Every team member with crackerjack timing and in the right positions and so forth. And then to watch it fall apart, right? I mean, because obviously if everything went according to plan, it'd be a pretty dull drama with very little tension and so forth. So you have to then throw hydrospanners into the mix in order to knock them off of course and force them to improvise or get themselves out of trouble. And this episode delivers that as well, because despite having a scale model of the garrison and despite knowing the codes and everything else, things go wrong. And alas, not all of our intrepid team of rebels lives to see the episodes to come, and we'll get into that shortly. But I kind of want to start my big overarching note, and I'd like the two Jedi Masters on the council with me to sound off on this as we set the table. The idea of this is a robbery, right? We've talked about radicalization and rebellion and fighting for the cause and what you believe is just, and parallels with American history and modern warfare and uprisings and so forth. And we've always sat on the presumption that as long as the cause is just, as long as what we're fighting for is, pure and true and just, then the ends do probably justify the means. Again, the American Revolution, the Civil War, Sherman burning down Atlanta, combat strategies used in World War II, dropping an atomic bomb on Japan. I mean, we've always said that if you're fighting on the side of good, then it's okay. And I think the beautiful thing about this show, about Star Wars Andor specifically, is while it doesn't require you to dig any deeper than what it's showing you, there's a heck of a lot you can excavate and dig deeper with context and subtext in this show if you're willing to look. And if you're willing to look, the show does provide some clarity as to what its opinions are. Because again, as I stated at the top, this is a robbery. This is not Luke Skywalker and the rebels leading an attack from Yavin 4 on the Death Star. They're stealing money, right? Now, there's money all over the galaxy. There's credits flowing here, there, and everywhere. This one heist is not going to defeat the Empire. It's going to cause some pain in the ledgers. It's going to come at a cost of some equipment and some personnel. But the Empire will live, breathe, and strike back when the dawn rises. And so you kind of ask yourself, what motivates the rebellion? What is this a just action? One man's freedom fighter is another man's terrorist. If they had placed, improvised explosive devices on an imperial parade, let's say, or done something of that nature, would we, on Ferrex, just like they were escaping Ferrex, we're rooting and cheering for Luthen and Andor to get away. And yet you have law enforcement personnel getting wounded and killed in the streets, and equipment being destroyed, and general chaos. Couldn't you as easily sit on the other side of that fence and call that, a terrorist attack, as the Empire is planning to do, as we see at the end of this episode? So I want to open it up, gentlemen, in the idea of, we're supposed to be rooting because we believe in freedom, and we believe in a galaxy where you have free will and the ability to not live under fascism or tyranny. But at what price, right? At what cost? And you look at this and you see the commandant's family taken hostage. A terrified mother and her 12-year-old son, who, let's be honest, even if they are married to an imperial commander, would their sacrifice or that kind of trauma, is that justified and earned, right? You see the domestic scenes with the commandant and his family and so forth. And again, I'm not asking you to feel sorry for the Nazis or the fascists, but you realize that these are human beings, and they have, they have family squabbles, and they want to get transferred off this rock, and they want to go someplace more cosmopolitan in the galaxy. It's just, like I said, the show, you could sit there and digest it at its surface level and come away with a compelling hour of television. But if you sit there and peel back a couple of layers, you start thinking about how this might apply in a real world setting or a setting from our historical past. If you start looking at that kind of context, that's where this show deviates from the classical mythology of an Obi-Wan Kenobi or an Ahsoka, and like I say, if you want to ask tough questions, it gives you the forum and the opportunity to do so. So I'll ask the tough question to Jedi Master, UrzaMaster, and Jedi Master Lord Uther. Is this okay? That what they did and what they pull off, and ultimately what they got out of it, money, versus everything else, the loss of life, all of those things that we saw, knowing again that the Empire is the axe, right? And the axe forgets.
Well, and that's, I hate to say it, but in a way, this is kind of the undertones and subtext of the original trilogy, right? The idea that some people do very well under the fascists, some people don't. But in as much as that's true and that's alienating or subjugating, there are definitely people who are, to all intents and purposes, just innocents, really, even if they are serving as guardsmen, even if they're racist, as we see in this, to a certain kind of degree. And likewise, I think you even saw the seeds of rebellion in the natives as they were celebrating the Eye. I mean, they could just as easily have been radicalized to rise up against their oppressors right there, and may have made an impact. Although I think either way you slice it, you get this feeling that it's like, this is small potatoes. There's going to be an overwhelming response to put everybody in their place. And that's, I think, where Andor is almost a secondary character throughout this arc. He's just sort of showing us like the neutral ground, like, hey, you realize this is a suicide mission. Well, for a lot of these characters it was. Right. And you realize the repercussions of this are probably just like kicking a beehive. It is. And in that context, it's like, yeah, you do have some innocents on both sides who end up dead or traumatized. But likewise, you can't have these things, or you can't not have these things and still have a revolution. Right. You inevitably will run into some red paint as you're getting through, the rest of the fight. I think the examination stands. I think I'm going to draw a parallel I remember from, my teenage years, which is a very prototypically rebellious time. And I think a lot of people who saw Star Wars in their teens, or teenagers who saw Star Wars later, were like, oh yeah, Rebel Alliance, that sounds rad. Look at Han Solo and all that. You kind of realize a couple decades later, you're like, yeah, they're rebels, but what makes them all that much better than your average, I don't know, criminals? And or what makes the Empire so much worse than anything that they're going to put in place? And it's just jaded adulthood view, which I could see why, some people who have reviewed this show in the past have been like, it's just kind of a sobering look, and that's not really the fun of Star Wars. Like, we want to watch sci-fi to escape reality, not suddenly have it thrown in our face. But the musing, I think, is an important one. I think there's always been this human struggle with, overcoming the conquistador. At what point? At what point are the Persians the right option? Or do you side with the Spartans? The Spartans, by the way, who threw babies off a cliff if they didn't think they were strong enough to be Spartans. And if those babies survived the fall, they could come back and be Spartans. But they were still going to live through hell to be Spartans. So, yeah, if you think of the Frank Miller verse, this is kind of terrible people to idolize. And as a matter of fact, that battle did not go at all the way that movie depicted, or that comic. Nor were the Persians as bad as most people thought, and likewise they weren't as good as some people thought too. It's the same idea here. The Empire, by and large, they want your resources. They want to exploit your planet for whatever they need. But if they don't really need your planet, they're not going to touch it. For the most part, there's a lot of planets in the galaxy that just, think of Tatooine. What is it? Just sand. Lots and lots of sand. Kind of gets everywhere. You start to hate it, right, after a while. But they got pod racing, and this is pod racing. But you know what I mean?
Let me take a point you just said and sort of reframe it. That when you talked about the natives, there are suggestions made in the last two episodes that this valley will be, redeveloped, that they're sacred viewing places for their religious holy ceremonies, that they will no longer be able to participate there, that the numbers have come way down. And you see the joy of these villagers. We don't ever really get to know their language very well, for a couple of subtitled scenes, but you see the joy in their dancing and their singing and their praising as this celestial event takes place. And you realize, again, in the Star Wars that we are comfortable and familiar with, it would be, we're going to save the natives. We're going to save the Aldani from the Empire and drive them from the planet. And then they will have their beautiful lands once again to their own. And that's what I was saying, is that this is such a, like I say, it's such it's a robbery. I mean, it's not that they don't care about the natives, but those natives are still going to get squished under the heel of the Empire, unfortunately.
It's a train robbery.
Right.
It's a 3-story arc about a train heist.
Right.
And it has a very Western feel, if you think about it. The great train heist movies of yore were all about, the guys in the black hats versus the guys in the white hats, whichever side happened to be painted doing whichever thing, and who were kind of the casualties in between? The guys with the clay on their face, right? Or wearing the rice paddy hats, like the people who were exploited, who were to be forgotten because they didn't, quote, play a part. But how close were they to being the revolutionaries we should be idolizing? How close were they, the oppressed, to being the ones that we would be exalting in these Star Wars films? That's, I think, the compelling part about this episode, is that in as much as there is, I guess, resistance of a resistance nature, there's also that resistance of a cultural nature. Like, you may take everything from us, but you'll never take who we are. And that's the real revolution here.
Sure.
Oh, yes. I think a lot of it's perspective, right? I mean, so who's right and who's wrong? It's all perspective. It's if it fits your cause. So, and sometimes it's messy to get to the place you want to get to. And I think the one thing that really happens here is, think about when you see Star Wars: A New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi. There are good guys, there are bad guys. Han Solo is the rogue, right? He's a little in between, but guess what? Really, by the end of the first movie, he shows up, he saves the day, he's a good guy now. I think Rogue One, the movie itself, starts to kind of make the waters a little murky, and now Andor, you can't see through it. I mean, it dirties the water completely. In other words, we go from these very specific good guys, bad guys, and now you're continuously questioning yourself that even if you're aligning yourself with who we believe are the good guys, are they really good? Because they got to do a lot of nasty things to be good, right? But my thing now is, are we kind of cutting the Empire too much slack? I mean, just because sometimes you have to do very tough things to accomplish a goal.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the question is how far are you willing to allow your moral compass to go to where you start straying into the area of you're as bad as the enemy is. But if you've got to eliminate the enemy, are you willing to do those things that your enemy does to get rid of them, to possibly bring about change?
Right.
Because sometimes that's what it takes. Go ahead.
Now this is 5 years before Rogue One, and it's 5 years then before the Death Star becomes fully operational. I think we can all agree in our Star Wars timelines and mythology that by the time the Death Star starts planet destroying Alderaan and laying waste to Jeddah and Scarif, at that point it doesn't matter whether you're I'm just a technician or so forth. You've picked the wrong team, and at that point, as you say, it's a binary choice when you start talking about galactic genocides. So we're still 4 or 5 years away from that moment where the Emperor Palpatine and his Grand Moff Tarkin completely cross that line. And I don't want to make it sound like, boy, I'm really rooting for the Empire in here. I just
No.
it's just the thing that, and let's look at the behavior of Skeen, right? So Skeen, in the last episode, was ornery and was suspicious and paranoid, but he had a plausible backstory that his brother, he was doing this out of a sense of vengeance and family, and that was good enough for him, right? And he accepted Andor's, or he didn't accept it, but he let it slay that Cassian's journey was on a similar path and so forth. And this episode reveals a completely different side, if you will. And what I think, I'm fascinated what you guys think of this. He makes a sales pitch to Andor in this episode. After the heist is done and they're trying to pick up the pieces, he makes a compelling pitch, he thinks, as to what they should do with the loot. And I believe that the Andor we met 5 episodes ago would have jumped at that chance, would have jumped at 40 million credits and being left alone in the galaxy and to hell with everything else. And I think this is a pivot moment where, and you guys can talk about how you felt about his response, this is a pivot moment where suddenly that idea is pure revulsion. And something in him has transformed. Even if he's not ready to fully embrace it yet, like that moment just shocked the heck out of me when I first saw it, and I've seen it 3 or 4 times since, and it never loses its potency. I know it's a go-to move for him now, if you're familiar with the character. But boy, talk about that, and the idea that perhaps this journey is already starting to, change him into a radical.
Well, his moral compass won't allow that to happen now. It's somehow been realigned in a sense, or moved over to the side of what we would consider right.
It's shifted a little. Like he hasn't fully.
He takes the chance, but even when he's like, I'm only taking my cut. Well,
Right.
There's something fair about that. UrzaMaster, Urza Masters, and I have talked several times about doing business, and I've talked about how I would run my business, and I always was fair to my customers because I believed that was the right thing to do. My moral compass wouldn't let me take advantage of customers even when I knew I could, because I didn't believe that was right, and I could not sleep at night thinking that I was cheating people out of their money. I didn't think that was fair. And I find it interesting that, first of all, Skeen and Andor both lied, and like Andor's mad that he was lied to, even though he had to lie himself, right? Being a part of the group.
Right.
But he's you're right. I think that's a good word. He was so repulsed at the idea of now taking this money and splitting that he knows Skeen can never be redeemed, and pulls the gun and shoots him. Which you have to ask yourself, would you have been okay if Skeen shot Andor? But I guess we wouldn't have been okay with that, because we hear Andor go, when he goes in there, he's like, I'm just going to take my cut that I was promised. You can have the rest. ABC ya. I'm out of here. Right? Oh, I'm okay with that. That seems fair and kind of seems just, and maybe it's even moral.
Well, and he also
Even though
pays
he's
for the
shot
ship.
guy.
He pays for the ship he's taking.
Right, yeah, he does that too. Right? So, yes. So I think there's some people out there, and then I'll throw it over to you, UrzaMaster, but I want to make this one last point while I remember it. We're obviously on the internets doing our own little research because we're trying to continuously grow this thing, which, by the way, if you want to click that subscribe button down below and watch the entirety of this podcast and others, that will help us continue to flourish and blossom, and maybe my hair will even grow back at some point because so many subscribers will come in. But, oh man, where's they going with that? Oh, sorry.
Sales pitch.
Yeah. Oh, wait a second. Wait. Oh, I lost it.
See, when you're a graying Jedi, these things
Yeah,
happen.
Things happen,
these-
yes. There's a
these
disturbance
things
in the
do
force.
happen.
Take it, Lord
There
Ursa
was.
Master.
Well, I think it's important to note, right, that the first thing Andor does when he's like, okay, I'm taking off, I don't feel comfortable, this whole thing is getting spooky, he offers double what the ship is worth in the barn. He's like, I'm only taking my cut. I'm going to pay double what this ship is worth. So he's actually only taking a portion of his cut. And on top of that, he's mortified by the fact that this kid, with all the ideals, the whole reason that they were there, which I think becomes pretty clear to Andor, that's like, he really is the only one who is true to the cause in all senses of the word, that at least Andor knows at this point. And he didn't make it. He's like, all right, I'm out of here. I'm not putting my neck on the line. This seems too dangerous. He's scared. But he's also scared of his own character development, right? He's scared of the fact that now he's sort of seen a better way or heard a better way, and he's afraid that there's too many sharks in the water, that this, fledgling idea is just dead on arrival, right? And there's probably a lot of truth to that. And I think that's in some ways where a lot of revolutions tend to fail, is either A, they're not willing to do the dirty work, or B, they're so willing to buy in and do the dirty work that it's so very easy to lose sight of the ideals behind it. And now that the idealist is gone, what does that leave but a terrorist? And that's, the real moral question of this episode is, at what point do you stray from a just cause to simply wreaking havoc?
At what part do you lose yourself?
Exactly.
At what part do you cross the line that you thought you couldn't cross? And I think, and I know we're drawing a lot of parallels to today, and I know I mentioned the story last week, but I think this fits in again. Luckily we have been quote unquote safe for a certain amount of time, that we forget what it takes or what people are capable of when they believe in their cause. And I'm talking about here at home. I'm not going to talk about anywhere else right now. But sometimes we almost become too secure, and we forget that people are willing to do things like this. These are bad things that are happening. It's not like these are good things. These are bad things. And I think sometimes we forget the bad things that it takes, like I said earlier, to get this whole thing to happen, which I remember what I wanted to say, so I'm going to throw it in there real quick. There's a lot of people hating on Andor, and they're hating on it because, in my opinion, they're hating on it for a couple of reasons. First of all, they want the good and the bad. They don't want any in between, right? And this show, let me tell you why this show is brilliant. It might be better than Mandalorian, okay? Because it's making people like us have these conversations, and it's making A New Hope not look that clean. There's not that clean of a cut to get them to the point that they can rise up and fight against who is considered the bad guy. That's why this is such a beautiful show. There's a lot of, we talk about the behind the scenes, or the guy sitting behind the desk at the Imperial office putting together credit bills or whatever. Like, those people make a difference in the long run. These people are doing those things to make this rebellion happen, and it's taken bad things. And I think that's bothering some people that want that light and dark side, and that's all there is to it. And this show is skewing it completely.
Is that Tony Gilroy saying up front, I don't care about Star Wars? Like, I don't have any brand loyalty to it?
No, I think he's...
I mean, you do that between Dave Filoni and Tony Gilroy, right? They're both coming after George Lucas's vision. They're both trying to extend that vision. And Filoni clearly has done an excellent job of trying to keep the mythology, going forward, expanding upon ideas that George Lucas may have only touched upon, and so forth. I argue, even in The Mandalorian this past season, which we will discuss on future episodes of The Graying Jedi, that entire segment where we spent it on Coruscant with the Doctor and that creepy ex-Imperial, we did this whole diversion. I believe that subconsciously came out of Andor, as opposed to Grogu and Bo-Katan and the quest to... I mean, that entire episode of sort of the machinations and the betrayals and that episode has much more an Andor DNA than, other things that had come forward to it. So is it cool that you basically bring in a wild card and he's like, hey, I'm here to tell a good story. And this is the story I wanted to tell. I don't know if George Lucas, even in his 70s, both age or in the decade, I don't know if this is the story he would have led with, right? When he was doing this, he was doing that metaphor of the little guys and the big guys, and the little guys have sticks and the big guys have the guns, but the little guys are going to find a way to win. And that's very uplifting. And coming out of Vietnam and Watergate, that coalesced, we'll talk about this when we talk about A New Hope, that energized an entire generation. It gave them hope, A New Hope. And like I say, this one, as you say, it's rougher. It's not as polished.
That's the easy story to tell.
Right.
Now, we're going to be 51 in a month. Looking back, that's the easy story to tell. This, and Jedi Master Psyllium Maas says, we've had this conversation before. Do writers intentionally go in thinking that they're going to accomplish A, B, and C, or do they go in with A, and then B and C wind up coming out because of it? Like, Gilroy is giving us some hardcore stuff, and I know I continue to go back to that, but he's giving us the dirty side of this rebellion. But that's okay, because like we continue to say, that's what it takes. Look at our own history. I mean, you had guys dumping tea and setting things on fire. I mean, they were doing the things that had to be done to get us to where we needed to be. And I feel like that's right. That's what's happening here. I know I keep harping on that, but that's just the absolute beauty of this. So, Jedi Psyllium Maas, is that the intention when you go in to write something like this, or is this just a product of it?
Well, okay, and we're going to talk about this more in next week's episode of The Graying Jedi, because it actually plays a part in the backstory of next week's episode. Wink, wink. Make sure you guys don't miss that one. Gilroy, what sold him to Kathleen Kennedy, again, they'd worked together on Rogue One, was that he said, you can do anything you want with Star Wars. You can tell a detective story, you can tell a mob story. At one point, Guillermo del Toro was he literally had pitched and was moving along in development Scarface, but instead of Al Pacino, it was going to be Jabba the Hutt. Like, that was, for a while, that was a thing. And when Rogue One was first, yeah, exactly. And when Rogue One was first developed and then developed further into what it became, it was going to be like the behind the scenes World War II picture, like the Guns of Navarone or A Bridge Too Far. Like, it was going to be the mission movie where we're going behind enemy lines to defeat the enemy on its own turf. So Star Wars is elastic enough as a concept, as a mythology and that's what he wanted to do, is he wanted to do the Star Wars lawyer show. He wanted to do Law and Order, but Star Wars, right? He wanted to do the ER show, but Star Wars. He wanted to show that the proof of concept that you don't have to limit yourselves to the overarching mythology of a single family or a single thing of Force users, but that you could tell almost any story you wanted in this environment. This happened to be the one because he had developed the Andor character, when working on Rogue One. This is the one he wanted to tell. So yeah, I think they come in with the whiteboard, and I don't think they set out, with the pretentious, pompous, well, we're going to do the story of radicalization. But I think as you start breaking the story down into bite-sized pieces and episodes and scenes, then you start to see how all the pieces fit together, like an intricate jigsaw puzzle. And at that point, then, like I say, you're left with either and again, what's great about the show, like we say, you don't have to sit there and commit yourself to a historical study if you just want to watch an exciting, train robbery, because this episode delivers that, right? But I'm just saying that, we as fans, as Graying Jedi, as Star Wars fans who have grown up with the franchise and matured with the franchise, this is a new dish, right? It's something new on the menu, and I'm finding it quite tasty. That's at least where I'm coming from, and I know what you're talking about, the knee-jerk reaction to say no, that's not for me, And, I suppose that could be the case depending on how you approach it. I don't think UrzaMaster and his younglings are, again, like completely, wrapped with this per se. They might think, oh, wow, the eye, that is cool. And it is. But this is not a show for younglings, much like Young Jedi Adventures, the animated series now, is aimed at squarely at preschool audiences. And that's who it's supposed to appeal to. And so, I mean, like I say, it's elastic enough to be able to encompass many points of view. And I think that's just the joy of it. But let's hear some
I also think
horror theory.
Oh,
No,
I
go
keep
ahead.
talking, and I should let
going.
UrzaMaster talk.
No, by all means, Lord Uther.
I think it's good. I'll jump back in then because I can't help myself. The pacing of this episode was phenomenal, and the longer the episode went and the deeper we got into it, the faster they were cutting the scenes. And I really noticed that with my second viewing, that as that heist continued to move along, they were cutting between the stormtroopers getting into the TIE fighter troopers, which
Right.
looks super cool, by the way, getting into the TIE fighters, and they're cutting back, and they're cutting the pace picked up as the heist picked up. And I love that and really kind of recognize that until obviously they completely wind up leaving. But I thought that was one of the masterful things of this episode. UrzaMaster, over to you, my man.
Yeah, I mean, this episode was constructed famously. Excellent writing. The denouement was exactly what I expected with a 3-episode arc. I have to say the killing of characters was a little predictable. You kind of knew going into it, like, most of these folks aren't going to make it for one reason or another. I did like the subtle hint at an enlightened relationship between two of the rebels. I don't think that should go unnoticed. That's pretty cool that they wormed that in there. I also thought it was very interesting how much realism there was in the heist itself. They have these 8 or 9 guards that they've taken captive, and they're like, all right, you guys are going to haul this and load this up for us, and we're going to rush you along and hurry you along, and they're clearly dragging their feet like a little bit, right? And clearly there's probably some guards that are going to figure this out eventually, no matter how much time they think they have, and they all are aware of this, which is why they're barking, move faster, get moving. And okay, fine, we can accept that. I think all along they probably knew there's no logical way that they're going to be able to unload that entire armory stash of credits. Likewise, if you push somebody physically beyond their limit of that age, it makes perfect sense Homeboy had a heart attack. And, for a second there, they all kind of looked legitimately concerned for him that he was about to keel over and kick. But what just comeuppance? Because obviously he was an abusive father and husband,
Right.
with a much younger wife, by the way.
Right.
So there's some feudal undertones to this, which I think is, you can't ignore that they are painting the most, archetypal bad guys as, literal, archetypal bad guys. Like the feudal lord and his much too young wife with his oddly younger son that he sort of hates, but at the same time is going to be, his heir, and he's all doing this for him. And it's man, bullshit. It's one of those things, they're really working hard to make the bad guys bad here. So you kind of ignore the fact that, your, plucky clan of good guys are actually committing some pretty heinous acts themselves, where they could have maybe just fostered a little bit of a distraction with the natives. And I was wondering if maybe that had been part of the plan all along, or maybe the natives were going to have some kind of uprising, and that was going to spoil the heist plot. Or help it along. I feel like that's a device that they kind of pissed away, to be honest. I feel like that could have been a more convenient out to preserve some of these characters that could have told more story with. And had this not been a 3-chapter story arc, I think you have a lot of potential there that was maybe wasted a little bit. And that's kind of the double-edged sword of these short, 3-episode arcs, is that you do get some compelling characters that kind of get lost in the fray. And I mean, I know there's probably characters that are going to come back and worm their way back into the story here or there in future episodes, but especially like our young revolutionary manifesto writer,
Right.
Nemec could have been truly a moving character. That could have been kind of the unsung hero of this whole franchise and could have had a much more eventful death. But as much as I'm disappointed by that, it's absolutely genius writing. Here's why. Because that's real. That's just real life. There were probably hundreds of American revolutionaries that had a very clear vision for the future of the colonies and what they should do. And among those, there were probably, let's just say generously, a half a dozen who probably had a utopian vision that was achievable, that would not have resulted in genocide or expansion or wars or what have you, and may have led us on a very different path here in the States. I mean, let's just throw that out there as a very distant hypothetical, right? Here is your revolutionary who was constantly writing, rewriting, editing, adjusting, figuring out the moral implications of everything he was doing. And that could have made a significant impact on how the rest of the rebellion goes. Do they end up sowing the seeds of the First Order? Do they end up excluding certain systems that end up being victimized over and over, like, say, Mandalore, or, what have you? A lot of things can change, but the reality of the matter is that sometimes you lose your best minds in the course of achieving the main goal. Because war is hell, war is dirty, revolutions are dirty. There is no matter who wins, there are a lot of losers on both sides. And that's just real life.
A couple of great lines. I don't want to fall through the cracks here. Again, written by Dan Gilroy. When Nemec, on a beautiful foggy morning, the day of the heist, just wonderful atmosphere and so forth as they're sipping coffee. And Nemec is all, he couldn't sleep and he's afraid he won't be at his best. And Andor's trying to reassure him that when the time comes, you'll be ready. Nemec talks about why should we stand for, boots on our throats and so forth? Why can't we believe in the justice and freedom and so forth? And Andor says to him, they don't play by the rules. They don't care enough to learn, which I just thought was a great summation of the Imperial mindset. And then Nemec sort of says to him, as sort of a forgiveness from revealing he was a mercenary, I'm glad you're here no matter the reason. And I think that stays with Cassian a little bit. He gives him a little look as he moves on to where he was going. I love Val hesitating. Like, again, we see her just kind of using bluster and bluff to keep the group together as, all of these, what's he doing here? And he's getting paid, and she just tries to use that voice of authority to keep them all in line. But then right before everything's going down, there's just that split second indecision. Is it fear? Am I really ready to commit to this? And then you contrast that once it's green light, then when they take hostages and make demands that the commandant lets them into the vault, and he's saying, you'll never get through, you'll do that. And she says, look, we win or everyone dies. And you totally believe her in that she's then suddenly crossed that line. And now it's fully, this is Patty Hearst. This is like, I'm going to pull the trigger if you don't open that vault. And giving back the Kyber. I thought that was, again, the honorable thing for Cassian to do. I mean, he's got credits. He's got a ship now. He can just, it's another 30,000 sitting around his neck. He's like, here, give this to your friend. And almost maybe, again, rejecting, I think Uther brought this up, his compass has been aligned to a degree, but he doesn't want anything more to do with suicide missions and causes. And so it's appropriate, if not predictable, that Val gives him the manifesto and says he wanted you to have this, read these words, so to speak. And obviously that will plant, hopefully, further seedlings there. So, and we finish with Luthen, right? I mean, we get Mon Mothma in the Galactic Senate, which is always great for you prequel fans. I never get tired of the Senate. Nobody's doing any work. They're all too busy looking at their holo screens. And then Luthen and his assistant, they're, working the shop. Suddenly news comes in of the raid, and he's giddy, he's elated, right? Because he wasn't there on the front lines. He didn't lose those people. He didn't have Nemec's blood or Skeen's betrayal or so forth. And he can afford to laugh and say, oh, it all worked out, or isn't that great? However it turns out. So that was interesting too. He's a ruthless SOB. I mean, I love him a lot, but it's a little callous there at the end when you think about everything else that they went through. And what's going to happen to poor Cinta, right? She's still stuck planetside. Everybody else hightailed out of there. She's got to get off world and fast before the retribution sets in. So those are my little.
You know what I noticed? There's a lot of capes in Star Wars. Like all the like the leaders or the whatever, they have capes. I don't see a lot of capes in Star Trek.
No.
I just thought that was interesting, right? Like capes seem to be pretty prevalent in the Star Wars universe.
It makes you
wonder.
Edna from The Incredibles, didn't she say "don't no capes"? Like she was like that was her big thing in The Incredibles. She's like, no
makes
capes.
Us wonder what is it?
Well, it just makes you wonder, like, why the capes? I've always thought about that. Like, I'm sure it was a functional thing, like filming in the desert of Tunisia. Like, you kind of needed something to like sort of protect the actors from the sand if it whipped up in the wind. But as they kind of go forward, it's always been just strange to me, like, why the capes? Why the robes? Of course, there's some religious corollary, I'm sure. And then, of course, there's the feudal corollary for the senators, and there's some Greek corollary there with, like, especially Mon Mothma in the original trilogy, wearing the robe. And I think even she had, like, the olive garland brooch on the robe.
Yes.
But, it's just these visual cues that, I think I've always, to a certain degree, associated the cape with, like, I don't know. You get stories like Sleepy Hollow or stories about Jack the Ripper where there's like this cape and sort of Dracula. It's sort of nefarious, and it just hints that there's something below the surface to be hidden. Again, and I think it falls on good guys and bad guys. Both have something to hide. It's probably accidental, and just because it's part of the Star Wars universe, is just part of costuming. But it makes you wonder, like, is that intentional? And to get to your point, Lord Uther, I wanted to bring up that from a writing perspective, writers write the stories they want to tell. They do craft in certain messages or certain arcs that they want to get to the reader or to the viewer or what have you. But it's also true that everybody brings something to the material. And that's inevitable and inseparable. You cannot remove that bias. You cannot take that away from whoever's consuming the media. That's why when people get upset about someone expressing an opinion about a book or a movie or an album or something, oh, I really hated that for XYZ reasons. It's like, of course you did, because you brought something to that you saw that you didn't like, whatever it may be. And vice versa, you brought something you really liked, and that's why you really love that. It's how opinions work. But it's also kind of, it's the beauty of a well-told story versus the beauty of a story that beats you over the head with a message. And that's why I get really upset when we get films, books, TV, that just relentlessly assaults you with what it's trying to say. That is the biggest turnoff, I think, for audiences. And I think what's interesting about Andor in particular is that it doesn't ever turn you off by beating you over the head with a message. It's literally just presenting you.
Yeah,
with
it
the
just puts it
stories.
out there. That's a great point, right?
And that's
it's for us to decide
exactly.
and look at how
It's
we're
crust
debating
level.
it. That's
Yeah.
an excellent point. That's why I love the Graying Jedi impending rebrand, which is why you should subscribe as well and leave your thoughts below. Not that I meant to cut off Master of UrzaMaster's Jedi Master Urza, but he brings up such great points, which is you should leave your hey, all of our subscribers leave your comments below on that because that gosh darn it, that's such a great point.
Well, when we think about, shall we say, the sci-fi movies that don't tell great stories.
The Phantom Menace.
Not necessarily the Phantom Menace, but, think about Armageddon. It's a sci-fi movie. It really is not presenting you with any kind of moral question or any kind of
Yeah.
musing on society. It's a very straightforward story. It's entertaining, but it's not. It's also not preachy. It's not asking you to form an opinion. It's presenting an image. It's very much an imagist type sci-fi show. You can talk about that movie and express opinions on it till the ducks fly south, cows come home. Sorry, my metaphors.
I mean, from Wisconsin, you should be saying until the cows come home, but go ahead.
I mean, it's this Arizona green tea with ginseng and honey.
Not a sponsor,
I'm not getting
yeah.
paid to say that,
Yeah.
but yet Arizona, balls in your court. No, but you can talk about that because it presents like some scientific questions, but it really doesn't beam you in the head as a movie like. All right, guys, throw one out there. Why can't I think of one? I'm trying to make a point here about preachy movies.
Wait, you want a preachy movie or one that just
Yeah, one that really beats you over the head with it. Like, all right, we get it.
Battlefield Earth.
No, not really. I really like Battlefield Earth.
Gotcha.
But you got me there. Oh, I've been exposed. All right, this is the last episode of the Graying Jedi, guys.
Matrix? No, that's kind of that's a movie that makes you question things a little bit.
Yeah, probably not The Matrix either. But I'm thinking of a movie like the Ghostbusters reboot. Okay, the all-female cast of the Ghostbusters reboot. Now, I'm not here to debate the merits of gender swapping a movie, but that movie really does kind of beat you over the head with the idea that comedy can be told from an opposite gender perspective and still be effective. And it's very self-aware and very much confronts you with that throughout the whole movie, which to me is what makes it fairly unsuccessful from a sci-fi perspective. Like, I get it. I get that you can tell the story a different way. I also feel it's unnecessary.
Instead of telling the
But
story, like they want to.
Instead of telling the story,
Right.
they're highlighting the wrong thing.
Right.
Tell the story. Like,
Right.
it could be very well done. And it, in my opinion, it was not a horrible movie. It just wasn't as successful as it could be because there was a little bit obsession over itself. Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah, because but it goes back to my comment earlier that it's easy. Watch the TV show Expanse. I
Yes.
mean, you want some complicated, like deep down stuff. Read the books or watch the TV show. Like, that's the tough story.
Right.
This
And then
is
watch
the
Buck
tough story,
Rogers
which I
in the
know I keep
25th
harping on.
century. And
Yes.
Yeah.
Buck Rogers.
Tough call. Well, look at Battlestar Galactica, which we should do an entire show. Like the new one, I mean, talk about questioning things and what's right and what's wrong. It lines right up with Andor.
Sure.
In terms of what justification and I'm more important than you are for reasons A, B, and C, but your reasons are X, Y, and Z, and that's why that's such a great series too, because it's the things that make you think. I think there's there's a time and a place for movies like Armageddon. I think that's an excellent point. The toughest part of that movie was Bruce Willis deciding that he was going to stay on the asteroid, right? Like that's the moral conundrum that really comes out of that whole thing. But it's fun to watch, right? It's lots of lights and flashes and oh my gosh, and Aerosmith
Transformers was the movie I was trying to think of.
singing. Michael Bay. There we go.
Michael
It's another
Bay
Michael
movie.
Bay film, right? Yeah. So it doesn't, and those movies I think have their place and they're fun. But when you want to, there's movies or TV shows like this that really make you question, like we've talked about, what's right and wrong, and even what you might like, what's right and wrong for you. Would you be willing to do this? Like, would you be willing to get crushed by a pallet, give out the last instructions, and then die on an operating table because you believe in the cause that much? Are you willing to do that? And we really haven't been. And I mean, what's the most we can relate to in terms of being able to do that? You know,
I've always
in our
said that,
lifetimes,
I've always said that crime is too much work. Whenever I see these elaborate heists, I'm like, that's just too much work. Like I'm not going to put in the effort to click into the video units to get them to replay something over and over, and then get the guards to like leave their fingerprints on a glass so I can use it as a thumbprint. Like it's too much work. I'm content. It's fine. You guys have your millions.
And that's kind of the fun of Andor too, is like you get the best of both worlds. You get the let's have a real moral discussion, a political discussion about the implications of what's being presented, or you can get the let's have a discussion about how entertaining the show is, because it's both, and that's the brilliant part where Michael Bay films, very entertaining. I like the Transformers movies outside of Shia LaBeouf. I also really enjoy, Real Thinkers, too. I mean, Wind That Shakes the Barley is a great movie. I was trying to think of this name of this Palestinian film I watched one time. Excellent movie, won a bunch of awards. I watched it in a world cinema class in college. Hell if I could remember the name of it. But it told a very similar story about ostensibly freedom fighters and the line between what is a terrorist, what is a freedom fighter, is the cause worth it? These are questions that get asked on a very, very real level, and I bring up Palestinian films for a very obvious reason that we don't need to get into on this show because that's not the intent of our show. But these are questions that you do need to ask. And this is a show geared at adults, and adults should ask themselves these questions from time to time. It also does not preach to you. It doesn't tell you what's right. It doesn't tell you what's wrong.
It lays it out there for you.
It lays it out there, and that's real life. That's the part that frustrates audiences who just want to come to this to see the guys in the white hats and the guys in the black hats. And unfortunately, a large amount of people, that's really what they want. They want escapism. They want the superhero Marvel movies. I love them. I'll be the first to admit they want the Ewoks defeating the big bads. They want David and Goliath. Those stories are popular with people for a reason. They make you feel good. This show can make you feel good, but it can also make you feel like, do I feel right about feeling good? As graying Jedi, I'm sure you gentlemen have had that moment where you're like, oh, and then you're like, ugh.
Yes.
More often than not, and not just changing diapers for children or picking up dog doo-doo in the yard. There are many an occasion in your life where you have to go, what am I really doing here?
We had that conversation earlier.
Yes, we did. Yes, we did.
Kind of weird that you said that. Let's rate this.
Dog doo-doo. Dog doo-doo.
I'm
Let's
ready
do
to
this.
rate the number of, well, not the number
Let's
of,
rate.
the color of our lightsabers. But I don't believe I will take the lead in this one here. I really want to hear from, again, our first-time viewer, long-time listener, first-time caller, Lord UrzaMaster. Set the table for us in our review. Which lightsaber will you draw from your sheath to wield?
This one, it had so much. We've had a lively discussion over it, and I think that's just representative of how I feel about it in a nutshell. As an adult viewer of a show, this is what I want a show to do. This one gets the double blade white lightsaber
Nice.
above the green rating. This is the Ahsoka dual saber episode for me.
Very nice.
I do not give that rating lightly. From top to bottom, this episode is fabulous. It's got a train heist. It's got gunplay. It's got sacrifice. It's got
Mon
big
Mothma.
moral questions.
Brief.
Mon Mothma.
Brief.
Our first stormtrooper appearance.
Stormtrooper reference. We've got TIE fighters, actual, like, dudes in black
TIE
helmets.
fighting, yes.
We've got amazing pastoral images. We've got Clash of Civilizations. We've got literally everything you would look for in like a Charles Dickens novel and a George Orwell novel. Like if you mashed them together like this and threw them in a blender and then poured a nice sauce of Herman Melville and then spiced it up with a little bit, just a little dash of F. Scott Fitzgerald, this is what you get. I loved it. Loved every second of this episode. My elbow hurts.
I will go Yoda green,
Okay.
as you can see right there. Wonderful in every way. UrzaMaster, Lord UrzaMaster just laid it out there perfectly. And just the way this show, which we've lamented the entire time, just makes you question so many things. It's masterful writing, and that's something we've said, whether it's been on this show, the Warp Core, writing makes, I don't care what actors you have in the roles, the writing makes such a huge difference. Phenomenal.
Well, gentlemen, it's going to be no surprise which shade of the spectrum I go with. So this week it will be caramel apple Ghirardelli green. Delicious, delicious squares filled with a rich caramel that hints at a delightful apple-like orchard. So the perfect post-Halloween snack and the perfect color. Although I agree...
Available at fine retailers like you.
I agree
Near
100% with UrzaMaster. I just did not have anything within arm's reach that was transparent, translucent, or white, except for. But yes, I
Your
agree with
balding
all
head.
of his points. My
Yes.
balding head and chubby cheeks. So we are halfway through, gentlemen. We have 6 more to go, and if you think the story's taken some twists, think where we started on the junk world of Ferrex, and now we've just been through this heist, and what possible tricks up their sleeve do the Gilroy boys have? Well, you ain't seen nothing yet as we go into the back half of Andor, and more surprises await us.
With that, I almost did it again. Almost did it again, you guys. Not this week. May the Force be with you.
And also with you.